Good evening, and I'd like to welcome you to this public hearing of the Borough of Gettysburg. This time we will be considering, or listening to the public for comment considering an ordinance that we have proposed regarding the intent of the borough to enact the ability for certain tax credits against tax liability imposed by annual real estate and earned income taxes here in the Borough of Gettysburg as a benefit to certain individuals who qualify as active volunteers for the provision of fire protection services in the borough provided by and through the Gettysburg Fire Department. Mr. Easton, maybe you want to explain a bit here with X 172?
Yeah, just very briefly. This provision is under the Pennsylvania Health and Safety Code. It relates to incentives for municipal volunteers of fire companies and nonprofit emergency medical service agencies. The purpose of this section or this chapter, or these provisions of the code, is to authorize municipalities to enact a tax credit against an active volunteer's tax liability as a financial incentive to, and there's a couple of rationale. Number one, to acknowledge the value and the absence of any public cost for volunteer fire protection and nonprofit emergency medical services provided by active volunteers. And number two, to encourage individuals to volunteer or for former volunteers to consider rejoining as active volunteers in a volunteer fire company or nonprofit emergency medical services agency. In our particular case, we're talking about fire protection services, volunteer firefighters. Actually, the term of art would be to provide an incentive to an active volunteer. An active volunteer is a volunteer for a volunteer fire company who has complied with the requirements of the Volunteer Service Credit Program and who is certified under the statute. There will be parameters, certain time requirements, etc., that a volunteer must meet, and that would have to be certified to by the fire company to the borough before they can invoke the tax credit. The purpose of this public hearing, even though this is under the Health and Safety Code, you may recall, like, for instance, well, maybe you don't recall, but I guess it's been a few years now, what the borough enacted a fire protective services tax. And whenever you implement a new tax program, apparently, not only when you're levying taxes, but also when you're providing for tax credits, you have to publish that intent early so that the public knows that you're intending on doing that. And very importantly, you have to conduct a public hearing to provide any opportunity for the public to provide their comments, their positions, their thoughts with regards to the tax program. So that's why we're here this evening. And the Act does authorize essentially two areas where the local government can provide for the tax credit incentives, and that would be with regards to your earned income tax and also your real property tax. So those two taxes are specifically authorized and in play essentially for the provision of the tax credits.
Okay. And just to kind of explain, mostly, I guess, for the people at home, because we don't have public in the audience for comment, the specific criteria that the borough has elected to pursue at our previous work sessions that would appear in the ordinance deal with ensuring that the tax credit program provide a significant value to the borough and its taxpayers. The tax credit program is designed that any foregone revenue will be justified by receiving services that the borough would otherwise be compelled to pay for. So specifically, this deals with the provision providing for fire protection in the sense that the borough or another entity and authority or the fire department itself would be compelled at a later date to hire certified firefighters, or that the borough would be compelled to increase its police department staffing to deal with the needs of traffic control handled by fire police officers. As such, the current projected impact of the tax credit program will be estimated to be approximately $1,100 per year per the firefighters that are living within the borough and meet the requirements of being certified to NFPA 1001 Firefighter 1 or NFPA 1002 Driver Operator Pumper or Driver Operator Aerial, or NFPA 1091 for Traffic Incident Management. If the borough were to have enough volunteer firefighters to essentially cover the needs of the borough, meaning if we had, or the equivalent of what we would have for paid staffing, if the borough were to staff a single piece of fire equipment with 4 firefighters on a 3-shift schedule, that would cost the borough approximately $1.2 million a year. If that were necessary to happen. The fire department currently handles 600 to 700 emergency incidents per year. If the tax credit program were wildly effective, candidly much more effective than I anticipate, and we're able to fill equivalent spots for 56 tax credit receiving volunteers, we'd be talking about approximately $61,600. So a very significant savings if this program were to be effective. We did look at the borough in doing this because of the concept of what's called turnout time, which the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, and ISO, and the Insurance Services Organization that sets your fire insurance rates, they refer to that. So the proximity of the volunteers living in the borough was considered as part of this program. I will ask if there is public comment, although I know that there are no members of the public here. Okay. With no other business, we will then adjourn. CDBG. We'll get started here. Good evening and welcome to our special meeting here this evening for the purpose of considering the submission of the CDBG application to DCED, or the Department of Community and Economic Development. Any public comments? Not seeing any. We'll move on to our new business. You should have a copy of the resolution in front of you. This is a resolution to authorize the Board of Commissioners of Adams County to submit the application for our 2022 Community Development Block Grant Funds to the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. The county acts as our administrator of these funds. So this is something we had discussed previously at public hearings. I would ask that someone make the motion new business, and then we can discuss this matter.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 102422, authorizing the Board of Commissioners of Adams County to submit an application for 2022 Community Development Block Grant Funds to the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development on behalf of the Borough of Gettysburg.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Now a time for questions and discussion, of this submission. You may recall this concerns ADA compliance, sidewalk and streetscape improvements in the area of Chambersburg, streets in Constitution Avenue there along North Washington Street, in conjunction with quite a number of other projects that we have that are all, other funding sources that are all combining to make this one project possible. Any questions about the use of the CDBG funds for this purpose? Or comments? All right, if not, I call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Not seeing any public comment, we will adjourn. Good evening and welcome to the October work session of the Borough of Gettysburg. This evening, if you take note there on the agenda, we'll be discussing the employee complaint policy, holiday parking, and of course continuing our budget discussions. So, a few announcements. An executive session of the Borough Council of the Borough of Gettysburg was conducted immediately following the adjournment of the October 17th, 2022 Borough Council 2023 budget work session meeting consistent with Section 708A1 and Section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act. The executive session of the Borough Council will be conducted immediately following the adjournment of this evening's work session of the Council, consistent with Section 708A1 and Section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act, for the following purposes. 1, to discuss matters involving the employment and the terms and conditions of employment relating to current borough administrative employees, and 2, to review and discuss matters of borough business which, if conducted in public, could lead to the disclosure of information or matters of confidentiality protected by law. There are a few dates there for your review. Note that our work session initially scheduled for next week has been canceled due to Halloween. Our final budget work session that is scheduled will be November 7th. We can schedule additional if necessary. Our business meeting on the 14th would be when we would vote to advertise the budget, with it tentatively being issued for public review on the 28th of November, and then for adoption on the 12th of December. All right, now I understand correct that Ms. Pettigrew will not be with us this evening, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So at this point, as for any public comment to items related to items that appear on the agenda, not seeing any, we'll move into old business. Our first item is the employee complaint policy. I direct the members to the draft that is in the folder for this evening. We did address some of the notes that we had from our last work session in September, specifically related to the question of whether or not the mayor could be compelled to take actions related to communicating this information. So the policy on page 1 towards the bottom was revised to simply eliminate the mayor, whereas previously it said the borough manager, mayor, and/or chief of police shall provide borough council with timely and unfettered access. That has been revised to simply the borough manager and the chief of police. The other items that were altered or added, really, one deals specifically with the failure of any department to comply with the policy, that would be referred to disciplinary action, and the other dealing with, essentially at the end of it, 2 items. First, that if a complaint was lodged against a department head, the investigations would be conducted by the Human Resources Director. And the last deals specifically with the, really what comes down to trying to do right by our employees, and that an employee who is subject to a complaint would be notified of that complaint at the time of the receipt by their supervisor, and a statement from the employee involved would be included in any and all reporting to the mayor, council president, vice president. The employees would also be notified in writing as the final result of any investigations concerning them, so that we don't have anyone who is essentially unaware of outcomes that are related to any complaint that is filed. So, with that, I'd open the matter to discussion. Items that you'd like to see revised, or comments you have on our current draft. This kind of originated with Labor Council. We've had some changes, so we would have to then circle it back to Labor Council before we finalize anything.
Chief, did you have any issues with the reporting? I was looking back at old notes with, like, victims of the crime, juveniles.
I honestly
did not have a chance to look over this. I was thinking that it was just a budget session, so I'm remiss. I will tell you that I do have some issue with the language changes. I think that it puts me in a bad position if a mayor would so choose to order me not to comply. I don't know where I would sit in that matter. I guess that's a matter for Labor Council
We will
to
refer that
address,
to
or
Labor
Harry.
Council.
But, you know, I know in past administrations, for example, Mayor Troxel gave the now infamous order that officers weren't to give ride-alongs to council personnel, or council persons. So I have a little bit of just looking, just on face value, what I see there now is if the mayor instructed me not to do something, what am I supposed to do? I do, as I said, I didn't have a chance to look over that language that Mr. Berger's referring to. That was a concern of mine before, and I don't know how it's been changed or what the language is, but if it leaves an out so that to address those things, I have no issue.
Well, I think the out that is in there talks about what is legally permissible. Right, so
So if there's something
should
that's
disclosure not be legally permissible because there was a minor involved, then that would not be permissible.
Okay, I think another thing that jumps out at me with the language about who is to conduct it if a department head is involved, it leaves me little control over this type of investigations and the possible interference in any criminal investigation that might be occurring at the same time. Generally, internal investigations are paused and until criminal investigations are conducted and the person is placed on administrative leave if it's that bad, if there's a criminal investigation coming. There's also some other language in there which may be taken care of by the illegal thing with Garrity rights and the availability of information obtained through Garrity as pertains to a criminal investigation. So that could cloudy any prosecutorial waters should a criminal investigation need to be undertaken against a department or anybody for that matter, if we don't have those controls built into the policy. Just a few concerns I would have.
Yeah, I guess I would ask, one of the experiences I've had during my time here that did not go especially well in certain scenarios were when we essentially paused or did not conduct. I understand the concept of how parallel investigations can cause problems, but if that's being coordinated, if you don't continue the employer end of an investigation and the criminal investigation proceeds and then leads to essentially nothing, then you've perhaps, I mean, we've had occasions where sometimes it's been great lengths of time, 8 months, a year and a half.
And I think the current state of thinking is you don't necessarily push those off completely, but you have to make sure that if they're running concurrent,
Right,
they're properly running concurrently. And you've really got to have those assurances, and I think it would need to be built into policy as to what can be shared, not shared on that. Even mistakenly shared could be could have grave consequences to a criminal investigation, because if that mistakenly shared information then garnered additional information down the road, then we have what they call the fruits of the poisonous tree. If you're not familiar with it, anything after that information or may have been garnered from the acquisition of that information is now not available and not admissible.
So my question there is, I guess if we're looking for, probably some guidance from Labor Council to write that in, should we include language that also includes the district attorney's office in addition to the police department?
I would suggest the district attorney's office be consulted with how they would like to see that written in there. But that's just merely a suggestion. It's obviously not a requirement.
I mean, I guess we don't have to identify who's conducting the criminal investigation. I just don't want to, I want to make sure that years down the road, if someone's looking at this, that they don't just say, oh, well, we talked to, officer, whomever, they're doing the criminal end and we're fine. Should we mandate that the DA be at least consulted?
That might be a wise move. The other
Like
thing
during
that
the
I'm thinking of
process.
now is we may want to look at some type of memorandum of understanding over who may conduct these criminal investigations. And more specifically, it's going to be against police officers, because we could technically conduct them against other folks. I don't know that that'd be in the best interest. I think that should probably go out to the district attorney's investigators or the state police at that juncture.
So we should probably consult with Mr. Senate if that were to come up.
Yeah.
Would that be, so in the scenario where it involved a police officer, all right, other employees, I'd like to think that our police could conduct the investigation, but I can understand within the department that could be an issue. The question, I guess, for Mr. Senate would be, is that something that they would take on if the need arose? Or do they want us to form an MOU with the state police because of their capacity?
I think an MOU either way. I don't know that you necessarily need an MOU with the state police, but I was talking more with Mr. Senate and the county detectives doing the investigation.
Okay.
I would hesitate, unless it was something really minor, to have, and I'm not trying to shirk any responsibility here, so please don't read it that way. I mean, if you want us to investigate other employees of the borough, we most certainly will. But there's that hint of impropriety, that hint of
Right.
well, how close are they? That simply something as simple as, like, if we have a minor crash in one of the patrol cars and it's going to be investigated by a police department, we either call Cumberland Township through the mutual aid agreement, they'll investigate it, or we call the state police and have them investigate it, because even if I go out and investigate it, there's that view that it could be improper. If you have an outside agency, there's that degree of separation there.
So it could be similar, like if we're,
Yeah.
so I mean, a pretty easy one, right, is you have, and it could be a police vehicle, it could be a public works vehicle, it could be a parking department vehicle. Someone has an accident and it's, leads to serious bodily injury or harm, something that could rise to, and there's some sort of criminal negligence or worse, okay?
Yes.
In that scenario, that type of circumstance, you would think, and I don't know, that sounds kind of reasonable that you would punt that to an outside agency, regardless of whether it was someone driving a snowplow or a parking vehicle or a police car, just because of the appearance that, yeah, that's fair. Okay.
So, given that this policy is, well, our intent is to craft a policy that applies to every department, it's also likely that, some of these complaints are not going to involve any sort of criminal investigation, right? It's something, if something happened at Public Works, we would want Robbie looking into that. Robbie would be investigating this for his department, right? So would you be comfortable with that language there at the end? In the event that the complaint is lodged against a department head, subsequent investigations will be conducted by the Borough Human Resources Director in conjunction with legal counsel and outside law enforcement agencies as necessary?
Sure.
Okay. Now, there's some good points to raise. I agree.
SEL. SEL.
That's what I thought.
Just, sorry.
There's so many.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, you're looking at the, okay. I'm
My
sorry, I wasn't
terrible
looking at that
spelling.
part of the document. I'm like, what?
Look at my ham-fisted spelling attempts.
All right, so I think what I'd like to do is just kind of review the segments of the policy, and we'll start, I think if we can start at the part where the section where it's labeled policy at the bottom of page 1. I think the purpose and the introduction are pretty clear. It's the policy of the Borough Council to require periodic, and we're considering making that monthly, which I think would be wise, reporting of complaints, investigations, and outcomes or accountability measures from the borough manager and the chief of police involving external complaints filed by persons, including anonymous complaints, regarding the operation of the borough government and/or actions of borough employees. Anyone have issues with that paragraph?
I would change anonymous to vetted anonymous, but that's just me.
No, that's
Can you
good.
clarify?
Pardon?
Can you just explain what you mean by vetted anonymous? So we're
A founded anonymous complaint, one that's not malicious, one that there's some teeth to, one that where you have habeas corpus, if you will, one where you can say it occurred.
Well, wouldn't the investigation reveal that?
Perhaps, but a lot
So
of
how
times
would
it
we,
wouldn't.
how would we establish that before we look into it?
There are complaints and
And we talked last month a bit about, informal and formal and incomplete were items that you had raised, and I'd agree. And I think I told you then that I'd rather know that there was something on the books and that, hey, the person, we couldn't reach them. They left us no contact information. So that later when an issue comes up, we say, hey, we understand that someone said that, an employee took a certain action, but without any additional information to go on, we just closed it. Because I think that was a lot of your concerns last month, where we have things that, are reported but don't really come to anything.
we do.
And I think I'd rather just have a complete list and know that, okay, like someone's essentially, lobbying on complaints. And candidly, we talked about in these reports knowing the identity of those filing the complaints. I know you had some concerns with those and the employees, but it kind of gives me a sense of, all right, what's the likelihood that I should really get too concerned about this, right? We have, I don't know if the chief, if you received those emails here over the last 24 hours or so, but we have some individuals in the community that sometimes say things that are a little irrational, and I'd probably feel a little less concerned if we have a routine of complaints that are, okay, this person didn't stop at a stop sign. All right, that is not going to raise the level of concern on my part as, things that are...
Well, a complaint can't be dismissed out of hand because we have previous experience with the complainant.
No, it just gives me a sense, I think, like as a receiver of a report, as opposed to somebody who's conducting an investigation, I feel like it gives me a sense of, all right, like how much concern should we be raised at the moment? How much should we, like that's usually what happens. We're like, all right, do we need to call the insurance company and give them a heads up? Are there actions that need to be taken before this thing even grows?
Right.
And I think what I'm looking at here is this policy is just designed to make sure that more or less the council is aware of what is happening and has happened. So I'm just kind of inclined to make that as inclusive as possible.
I think
I
that's
understand the concern that the idea, okay, there were this many complaints filed against an employee. I think the concern is right that it would cloud judgment, and I appreciate that concern. But sometimes people complaining about someone making DUI arrests, for example, just, to me, it tells me that they're doing their job. You know, like I'm not, I guess I have to look at the borough officials, the elected officials that'll come after us, and, you know, hope that they can exercise that same amount of judgment, that they don't jump to a conclusion based upon complaints that are made. And I don't know how else to proceed than to allow them to have a full picture, because that's been our issue.
I will always have issue with providing the employee name unless it's a completely valid complaint, is the bottom line there. I will.
Understood.
Again, if you all come up with a policy that's legal and arrived at legally and legally
Right.
put in place, I will abide by it. I have, again, some concerns I expressed earlier, especially with oversight from the mayor and what they will do, or what any particular mayor will do. And it kind of could put me between a rock and a hard place, but we'll cross that bridge. I also think from reading over this that you're still going to get pushback from the union.
Well, and that's a conversation we're going to have with them if we get there. And again, we're going to have to refer it to council and, you know, talk about the implications, because we can't just simply turn around and not adopt policies. I mean, no different than your operational procedures, right? You can't simply be concerned about threats from a union constantly.
No,
You have to do what you have to do.
I guess we just have to wait and see what you come up with and how that works. And you know, I have to see the redundancy, and you know, once you have a final draft, I'll look at it, or what you believe to be your final draft, I'll really look at it and see how much it conflicts or doesn't conflict with what we have already as far as complaints against officers. And go from there. I'm very comfortable that our personnel complaints policy is one of the best around. Know where it comes from, know how it's developed, know how it's been tweaked, and you know, if there's anything that doesn't jive, for lack of a better term, we can discuss it. So.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about incorporating some of that language to make sure that it's consistent. And that's something we need to attend to. So the following paragraph, the borough manager, the chief of police, and the chief of police shall provide borough council with timely and unfettered access to necessary information within limits imposed by this policy and the law, and provide timely written and detailed responses to inquiries from borough council regarding the status of investigations and accountability measures. Failure of any department to comply will result in progressive disciplinary action. Questions about that paragraph or conversation? That then leads to the discussion of oversight and what it shall include. The first segment being data analysis within the limits imposed by law, access to, collection of, and examination by Borough Council of relevant information on all external complaints or allegations of employee misconduct, including but not limited to all external or internal complaints submitted to the borough, including those which are initiated via civil action, identification of borough policies pertaining to the complaint or allegations, proposed policy changes, and policy procedure violated, if any, information regarding accountability measures, including but not limited to performance tracking measures, training provided or recommended, disciplinary action recommended and/or imposed. And then there's a suggested item of final determination of that discipline being determined by council. Now, that's one that I think we should probably discuss. I'm inclined to generally leave those escalating discipline, progressive discipline matters with the professional staff, provided that we have policies that essentially ensure that it happens. We do have a history of not always having a robust progressive discipline program that is followed, dealing with specifically some past employees at various levels of the borough structure. So that's I guess, Mr. Moon, it'd be time for you to discuss
so
what you're thinking there.
My counter argument there would be that the Borough Code specifically carves out hiring, firing, and discipline as the purview of the Borough Council. And as we are trying to correct a history of lackluster policy, things not being applied fairly or universally, I would rather have a standard where discipline is applied by an objective body.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that any of the above could be objective. I think that perhaps that this should refer to, or that this should be completed in consultation with Charles and I on some occasions. Have dealt with some matters, and Jake before may have dealt with some matters where it's helpful to be in the room and be part of that conversation and to have a very clear knowledge of what's happening and what has occurred and what has not occurred. I'm curious other members' thoughts on that matter.
I'm just thinking elected officials being an objective body might be an oxymoron.
Well,
Because I think
you have to consider
elected officials have agendas.
I think you have to consider not just who is sitting here, but I think your valid point. You have to consider any 7 people that could be sitting here from now into perpetuity. So I
agree.
think your
I
point
agree
is
with
well
you
taken.
that I would rather have a robust, progressive discipline in the hands of the professionals in their department. And that's what we're.
I mean, I don't know. Just personally, I have a hard time. I always look at the council as we set policy, and I try my best to let the staff run the government and not be in here every day, as some would. And I feel like this kind of flies in the face of that. So I'd be more comfortable if we have a policy provision that specifies circumstances where we have to enter into certain levels of discipline, a grid matrix or something of that nature, with certain offenses, or perhaps with just a mention of the consultation, but to put it in the hands of a council. For one thing, I think it could potentially cause issues with our ability to be reactive as well. The staff deal with these matters on if not a day-by-day basis. Sometimes minutes and hours could be important, and bringing it to the entire council for a decision might not be the most timely maneuver either.
Just that you say we should consider that not everyone here will be sitting here in the future, and we should consider that not every department head will be sitting there in the future. So I liked what you said a moment ago about combining the two, that the council would have the final vote on that after thorough discussion, consultation with the professional staff. Could we not have both?
Isn't that what we do now?
If we
Not
know
really.
about it.
Not really.
If we know about it, which we might not. I mean, that's kind of where I go back to, is I have rarely known about complaints filed in many circumstances, and then things kind of sometimes, just in terms of quantities, are revealed later. But I guess I go back to some cases we dealt with under prior employees where basically at the end of the day we found out that in order to avoid discipline, because that was perceived as something that would draw a grievance, we had circumstances where there were many counseling memos issued, and nothing more than that. And no one, outside of about 2 people, neither of which are here, knew anything about any of it. And that's what I'm concerned about. That, we had circumstances that, that could happen. I guess, provided that the amount of information we're asking for here is communicated, I feel a lot more comfortable that we would know whether or not things had reached and escalated to a point where discipline should be occurring. I feel a lot more comfortable if this policy leading up to this point were being followed, that we wouldn't be left in the dark as has occurred in the past. And in terms of the actual, whether it would be a ratification of something such as, issuing a suspension, but at the same time, I'm a little hesitant on that. I know Charles in the past has had to take actions like that. And, I think that a suspension would probably be over, possibly before the council met, or we could meet especially, but then what happens if you have a council that's elected and decides to overturn that? There is a certain significant risk there of, unfortunately, what amounts to small-town politics.
So I guess my concern about the objectivity just comes from experience as somebody who does supervise people. You can be very close to the people you work for, or the people you work for, or that work under you. And sometimes it can be really hard to make an objective decision because you know so much about what the person is dealing with right now. If we're talking about a complaint or an infraction that requires, a temporary suspension while it's investigated, I think that can be left to the supervisor. But when the final discipline is dispensated, I think that should be made by somebody removed from the situation. You can have an employee who, I know what they're going through, so I have a lot more sympathy for them. And you can also have an employee who you just can't stand. And you might be a little less fair with them because, they are always, doing something that sticks in your craw. So I think if we're going to avoid, as best we are able, the continuing liability of inconsistency in how we deal with discipline of our staff, then that decision needs an independent and universal standard applied.
I guess I just feel strongly that in a town of this size, I don't think that there's anyone that's that removed. I don't feel personally that I'm that much more removed from many of the employees that perhaps their supervisors are. We don't spend the amount of time together, but I feel like I know a lot of the people that work for us. And when it comes down to it, I'm looking at this as under the police's provision, because the way that everything's structured within the borough code, and with everything else with the manager, I'm looking at the police chief and the manager, and basically, I hate to say it, but part of their salary justification is that they have to take that that's something they have to do, and that's difficult, but that's part of being the boss. That when you have a borough manager over most of your departments, when you have a police chief over your police department because of the circumstances of how that's all set up, to me that's part of why they make the salaries that they make, is they have to deal with the fact that they may have to take an unpopular or just an unpleasant position. And I just don't necessarily, I can think of the number of issues that have occurred over the past 10 years involving council members and issues with things like parking spots and just all kinds of different things that I've seen in my time, and where people have gotten really intimately involved in things that I didn't think they should have. And I don't think that the council's in a permanent fashion really any better prepared than the officials we're going to hire. To me, that's part of the criteria of how you hire a manager and how you hire a chief.
I had one question or comment. So the progressive disciplinary action we're looking at would be like a verbal warning and then something in writing and then suspension with or without pay. Is that what we're talking about? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, and that is, I guess that came up in our discussion last time about, and we were talking with the chief about essentially, we got into the whole, what is a verbal
Right.
warning discussion.
Right.
Yeah, there was this
right.
whole
Some things
dialogue
warrant
about
more,
that.
some things warrant a written, I mean, serious enough infraction that you're looking at a written warning. I guess my comment, Mr. Heyser, about, the town this size, one of the things I think we have to be careful, regardless of size, is just consistency. Because I think what I've only been on council now 5 years, but I think when you look back and having attended meetings, with old previous councils, there have been a lot of inconsistencies. And regardless of our size, I think we want to try to make things as consistent as possible. And that way we remove the possibility of, because we are a small municipality and people know one another, and it might be uncomfortable for a department head, for the chief of police, or for the borough manager. You want to remove any favoritism or things like that as well, and you want it to be consistent. I think it serves everyone.
Right, so I guess I would ask which approach would you favor?
So that's what we're discussing
Because
right now. That's what
I
we're
think I
discussing
just,
right now.
with everything that I've seen over the years, I think deep down I have to rely on a manager and a chief to do that. I mean, I can remember many times that I've felt pressure to make many different decisions during my time here, and
Political decisions.
yeah, I think I'm a lot.
outside-
I think I'm a lot less sensitive to it than many. Candidly, that's just part of my situation is that sometimes I just don't, respond to that as I guess people would have expected, and I think they figured that out over some years. But yeah, I definitely watched people react very often to outside pressures, and I'm concerned that would impact our employees.
So you want to remove that as much as possible.
Yeah.
And that's why we're doing this whole exercise.
Yep.
Really.
Yeah, that's, I think, where I just look at that and I'm thinking that, in consultation with, or, I think that the council should be informed, and that's why I think most of this, for me, the policy is intended to make sure the council is informed. Okay, that we can make effective decisions about how we operate the borough and the policies that it operates under. The next segment dealt with monitoring, and this deals with a monthly review that would occur with the mayor, the council president, vice president. The summaries involving police incidents with use of force and any external complaints or allegations of any employee misconduct received by the borough. And that those actions, in order to ensure fairness and consistency, and actions consistent with the borough's disciplinary protocol. So that's kind of where I'm looking at that monitoring segment that covers that. Summary shall include the name of the reporting party when possible, the name of the employee, and I know there's some issues or disagreements about that. The date and the time of the incident complaint, the nature of the complaint, disposition or status of the complaint. Upon completion of this review, the information will be formally submitted to the Borough Council and made available with appropriate redactions to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. The information provided should not include information regulated by the Criminal History Records Information Act. As amended, the publicly released information will be redacted to exclude identifying information about the individuals involved. So I think Chief Glennie, we talked about this a bit, he would rather we not, of course, have the name of the employee involved. I hear you there. Are there other comments about the monitoring section? Essentially, that would be the month-to-month.
Didn't we say legally permissible instead of when possible, the reporting party?
I think you are.
it says summaries shall include the name of the reporting party when possible. Wouldn't it be more concise to say legally permissible? If
I would agree. Yeah, I mean, I would assume that there are certainly going to be times when it just has the term anonymous.
And that would protect you a little bit more, Chief, right?
Yeah, that's what I think a lot of this comes down to. It's one thing to write the policy, and then there will be a second step of we as really rather the borough staff, the manager and the chief, working with Labor Council to make sure that we can navigate and get what we need to get through and not provide information that should not be. So I know that makes it a bit challenging, but again, with things that have occurred over the years in various areas of the borough, I think this is something we need to do. The next segment deals with independent review of closed cases, that the council may employ an independent investigator to review closed cases involving use of force resulting in serious injury or death when questions persist after the monitoring functions have been completed. Investigations will occur at the conclusion of litigation if pursued and will be conducted for the purpose of making policy recommendations to Borough Council, the mayor, chief of police, and borough manager. And I essentially would see this paragraph as an encapsulation of what we went through with the McNeely report, where there were obvious gaps at the time in how our policies were set up and how things operated. At that time, specifically related to the police department, as a whole, I think that in the past few years, we're certainly aware, and we hope to make some additions to our entire human resources manual, where we are aware, that we have gaps and we need to start to address those, and this gives a mechanism to address them should we deal with a circumstance where it becomes obvious that there are gaps we were not aware of.
I will say there are no gaps in police procedures and policies.
Okay.
Maybe in the borough HR manual there are.
Which
There
covers
are not
all
in our
employees.
policy system.
Which covers all employees. Yeah, and I understand your faith in Lexipol, essentially. Okay, I understand that level of faith, but you just understand that our borough HR and policies apply to all borough employees, and all members of the borough police department are borough employees. So we need to make sure that we get that in order. And I think that some of that deals with the staffing situation over the years, and it seems that at many times, not just related to employment issues, but whatever is catching the attention of the governing body at the time, and a lot of things are kind of pushed to the side. And this is one that we need to visit. Then we have the kind of what I would call, this is Labor Council's kind of catch-all moment where they say the policy should not impair the authority and responsibilities of the police chief, the mayor, or the borough manager as provided by the borough code. Reports, recommendations, conclusions, and findings are not binding, factually or legally, on the borough, the mayor, the borough manager, the borough solicitor, and the borough council.
A quick question, are they binding on me?
Yeah.
Because I'm not listed in that list.
That's interesting. I wonder... That's interesting. So I'm sure this is something that was written by legal counsel. And it makes me wonder how they wrote that. But I would think that the order that's chosen is kind of interesting too. I guess it probably is written as the borough itself to include the department heads, but we could certainly add that. And that's something I think I want to ask about, that whole kind of the first segment to me is very clear, right? We can impair the legal obligations of any party. The second segment, I think I'll refer back to council a little bit. Because the thing that occurs to me is, so, like, certain findings, and I think that we want to make sure this stays within the employment scope of things and not in the criminal scope of things, because obviously certain findings could compel certain actions in a criminal investigation, I would think. But then maybe not. I've seen things not pursued that I tried to understand, and eventually I could. With the DA's office, I know that they have their own things to consider.
I think if there's a criminal element, it would at least be investigated,
Right.
or should be investigated. Now, whether that investigation yields any type of
Criminal wrongdoing, that's another question.
Yeah. So I'm just going to make a note here. Last sentence of Labor Council's language. I'll get some clarification from them. I feel that they could provide us with a purpose and reasoning for that.
I think it's probably read in conjunction with the first sentence.
Right. It's just meant to cover everything. Because if we had, I don't remember how many recommendations McNeely had, but it took a while.
It would not be binding upon those entities when they were affecting some sort of legal process or procedure mandated under the Borough Code or other law, if you will. And I would think that the borough would be an all-encompassing, that it would be the borough, all of its
areas. In the last two paragraphs there we have, were new this evening. The first, the event the complaint is lodged against the department head, subsequent investigations will be conducted by the Borough Human Resources Director. So we had discussed there, we'll need to add language to make sure that that's in conjunction with the outside law enforcement or district attorney investigation, if applicable. Any questions or comments about that paragraph? And then our last paragraph there, employees who are subject to a complaint will be notified of that complaint at the time of receipt by their supervisor. A statement from the employee involved shall be included in any and all reporting to the mayor, council president, vice president. Employees will also be notified in writing as the final result of any investigations concerning them. I would say I feel very strongly about this one, that the employees need to be aware of outcomes related to investigations. And if they occur, I don't want anyone hanging in limbo and not knowing where they stand.
This is another paragraph that we need to make sure is legally shored up, especially when you have a statement shall be included. A statement from the employee shall be included. I would renew my warning that if that statement is obtained through Garrity, it cannot be released, and if it is, it's going to compromise any criminal investigation, so we need to be real careful in those regards.
Got it. All right, other concerns with that paragraph? Okay, so I think we have some good notes to send back to Labor Council, and then we could revisit this possibly in November, depending upon how they are able to get back to us. Okay. All right, that would take us on to the issue of holiday parking. And Ms. Fissel, do you want to explain where we are?
Sure. So this is holiday free parking from Thanksgiving to New Year's. In the GARMA MOU, it does state that the Borough Council shall annually review the feasibility of the holiday parking program. It's been changed over the years. Signage has been changed. So we were just trying to figure out what anybody would like this year.
Have we had input from, I thought we had some input from Garma, perhaps?
So last year there was, every year there's multiple phone call complaints, not understanding the sign, not understanding the blocks, not understanding, then if they go to court, we're losing these, just due to people not being able to read signs.
What's the justification that the magistrate gives in those scenarios?
People not being able to read signs.
So for that reason, they're found not guilty? So what's the difference between having to read a meter head? Okay. We don't know.
I don't know, I just know that I'm going to these, and because the sign said Monday through Friday, but you got a parking ticket on Saturday because you didn't read that it said Monday through Friday.
But we don't have any actual justification from, that's interesting. Okay.
I did just hear, I've been forwarding all these complaints to Garma as well that I receive, based on tickets and signs and locations and things. I forward everything to Garma as well. So Jenny is very familiar with all of the complaints that have been had with everything. The officers, I actually just spoke up to one today, not knowing that we were even discussing this evening, said on the street they get the most yelled and screamed at during that 6-week time than they do all year.
Well, I think candidly, with the issue of how the holiday parking works, I think a lot of it, in parking in general, like when we went up to 3 hours, personally, I generally defer and ask for Garma's input related to that. So, if they're satisfied with the program, I understand there are going to be complaints, right? I know that people don't read, so
The last
trust
I
me.
spoke with Jenny, she said that she knows it's in the MOU, that it is up to the Borough Council.
Okay.
That's
that's
about
true.
2-3 weeks ago.
That's true.
So.
I think a lot of times, I'm curious to hear everybody else's thoughts. I kind of defer to what the merchants would want, because it's designed to benefit the merchants during that season.
Review the actual hours that are in the MOU now.
I'm sorry.
Review the hours that they're talking about.
It's Monday through Friday right now that is free.
Yeah.
That the borough is receiving $0 from anybody Monday through Friday in those sections that are it's the first blocks, the square, Steinway Avenue, and then Saturday and Sunday is normal hours. We would receive, we would be able to ticket, and meters should be fed 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Saturdays and 1 to 8 on Sundays.
Yeah, it used to be 12 to 8 every day.
Correct.
And we went away with that because of the establishment of the Christmas festival. That's the borough's only source of revenue for the festival.
Well, and the
is what it
signs,
comes down
people
to.
were confused with the 12 to 8, and it was 10 o'clock, or it was 11:45. And so I think
Right.
things over the years have just adjusted.
But to me, that was pretty clear. When the Christmas festival came about, there was no way, the borough receives no income for that related, except for parking to try to cover its expenses.
Right.
Pretty much what it comes down to. So I don't know, what do people think about holiday parking downtown?
It is a source of confusion. As I've mentioned at other meetings before, at the Majestic, we take complaints about parking all day, every day. But during the Christmas season, it is very confusing, I think, for folks. I'm sure there's a way to make the signage more clear, but again, I don't think folks will read it. I would think without the input of Garma and a determination from them whether they feel it is beneficial or not, like it would be hard for us. We don't want to take it away and then have businesses cry foul because we're impeding their ability to function. But if they're not finding it that it drives business, then why would we continue it?
And Gettysburg is big on, we've always done it this way, and so I thought it was still in place. It would be, any changes would cause even more confusion than Matt has mentioned.
I mean, I think,
I don't feel like changing anything.
I think a lot of the niche shops downtown benefit from it. And, I mean, if I had like a request from Garma, I think I'd be like, all right, fine. But without that, as municipal government, it just kind of seems like the council will be looking for more money out of parking. And that doesn't seem like a great justification at all. I think that, the slow season has gotten shorter and shorter over my lifetime. But I think that generally, after November 19th, we enter the slow season. And I know people have done a lot of things to try to make the winter months more productive for the merchants, but, I do see people in those shops that are not residents of the borough during that season, and I'm inclined to let that continue and encourage that, I guess I should say.
It's a nice gesture. It's the season where people are more generous. It just seems, a nice thing to do, I think. I don't know if Main Street has any thoughts on that at all.
This sounds like really.
Put you on the spot there, Joe.
Oh, I'm happy to be on the spot. Do you want me here? I mean, it's just, I don't have a ton to say, but no. Anything you can do to support the merchants and to continue to bring business downtown, I would, but understanding too that, it also costs money to run a government, so, you're trading one for the other, but I think it's really important to have a vibrant downtown, especially as we extend the tourist season into the winter months, and that continues to happen, and it's going to extend into December very seriously this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the confusion's the big issue. I think that, unfortunately, we just kind of have to bear the burden of the confusion and the issues that come with it to the benefit of the merchants, and I really do think they benefit. I would much rather people go down to any one of those specialty merchants and purchase those things rather than get on some sort of internet website. And that's kind of what I see. Like, I think of a whole bunch of places in Chambersburg Street and the square that I see people in, and I want to make sure that we're doing what we can to get them in there. So, all right.
Is there a way to change the wording so that it doesn't, to try to reduce the confusion, or?
You can try.
For the signage, I mean, I'd be like, pay
There's
Saturday,
been
Sunday.
many iterations
Don't
of the
pay Monday to
signage.
Friday.
I'll interject. I 100% agree with what Mr. Moon said probably 10 minutes ago, that it doesn't really matter what you put on that sign. All folks are going to see, and probably rightly so, is free holiday parking.
Right.
So, and based on 35 years of enforcement of the law, it really doesn't, the folks are going to see what they want to see, and I agree with Mr. Berger. I think it's a good program. I don't think anything needs changed. It's just, if you change a sign, they're just going to see free holiday parking, Patty. And I'm not saying that to be mean, but that's all they're going to see.
Right.
And
More signage creates more confusion.
Yeah.
And when I say it, I mean, folks literally will ask us how to use the parking meters. Well, you just put a coin in, and then you walk away.
But I mean, I've been places, I was recently in a city where I was, you're like, okay, I'm here, I'm going to make a morning of this, I'm going to go check out a museum, and trying to discern where to park and what to do, and then I think I paid for parking I probably didn't need to.
Right.
That's where I ended up. I'm like, well, I'm not totally sure, and I don't want to get a ticket,
Right.
so here's some money.
Right. I have so many parking apps on my phone now. And, I was just in Westminster and it didn't take any of those apps. So it was like, I either download it or, thank goodness it
Frederick
had a
a few months
kiosk.
ago, and I paid in Frederick, and I don't think I needed to.
Right, yeah.
Because I was just like, well, like this, I don't know what's going on. So short of saying, pay Saturday, Sunday, don't pay Monday to Friday, but in the same regard, I think everybody's right. I don't know how many times I get questions on a daily basis, do I need to write in complete sentences? Every single assignment I give at the top. That's actually not true. I'm giving an image analysis one right now that says you do not have to. You may write phrases or words because there's so many questions. Library of Congress. But every other one says right, and every day. Like, it's constant. Just the way it is. But it's always from the same people. So I do think that while we catch like some complaints and people that don't look, I do think that a lot of people do know what they're doing. It's just that those that don't seem a lot more visible. I think a lot of people know, like, hey, I'm going to hit the shops and I'm going to do what I need to do. I really do have some faith in humanity in that way. All right, a little bit, anyway. More than Matt, who deals with them every single day, saying, how do I do this? All right, so with the budget, let's, shall we start with those items that were questions before? Seems
So, yeah,
I know there are a lot of people here for that.
After the last meeting, there were a large number of line items that members of council had questions on, so I instructed all of our administrative staff to attend every budget workshop until you have a budget for 2023. So, do you just want to go through these line by line, or do you just... there's a lot here, so I don't want to waste time with rehashing some things that we might have done the last time. But everyone here is ready to answer each of these specific line items that you had questions on.
Okay, so just give me a second here to see if there are any. Are there any that you're aware of, or kind of the larger ticket items? I'm looking like the first one, mechanical devices, and I don't think we really need to spend a great amount of time reviewing the mechanical devices unless someone feels differently. Are there any you're aware of that are of particular note?
One of the biggest line items is actually line item 01361810, that it relates to how the Gettysburg Fire Department's full-time staff is paid through the borough's payroll system.
Okay.
So there's a large expenditure every year that comes out of the borough, but then there's a large reimbursement that comes back. So I thought maybe both Tammy and Kara could explain that process to council.
What line item are we on, I'm sorry?
01361810.
Okay.
You have questions on?
I think it just
We
explained
kind of
what we
briefly-
do.
When I was here last Monday, the last work session, I know that you had asked about why they were on there as a, an expenditure.
I don't think I'd noticed it before. And is there associated revenue?
It'll come back as a reimbursement.
Yeah, they
Okay.
come back as a reimbursement. They're on our payroll, both the full-time and the part-time employee. We pay their, we pay the payroll taxes, we send them through payroll. It goes direct deposit to them, but then the fire department gets an invoice every month, and then they reimburse us for the expenses. So it pretty much just washes back out in the general fund.
Okay, and so, I'm sorry, yeah, this is under the revenue side of things. And that benefits is all inclusive of their health insurance and everything.
Yes.
That was a question on that.
On the next page, 361-813, we had a question for Carly as to where this money comes from. Reimbursement code enforcement.
Oh, so that was actually, I don't believe that that's on the current
So I don't even see that line in
draft
there.
budget. Yeah, so what happened was last year, the beginning of this year, we got reimbursed from PMCA for inspection fees that they had collected, but they hadn't performed the inspection yet. So when we went to in-house regulated rental inspections, they sent us all the payments that they had received. But it was just a one-time payment. So it ended up carrying over into the budget, but really, we won't see that again.
It's because of the transition.
That was a one-time revenue, yeah, from the transition.
Okay.
Under Sarah's questions, 400, 321, and 324, are we going to leave the phone situation as it is there?
Yes, I did review that, and they are all there. There's just, in some of the Verizons for the naming, they just hadn't changed who they actually belong to. A few years back, we did purchase for
Yeah.
President and Vice President, Jake and yourself.
Okay.
And then when you didn't want yours, it was given to a different department.
So they are
So
they
they
are
are
in use.
assigned there, yes.
Okay, that's what I
So,
say. I couldn't
yeah.
remember a circumstance where I was aware of them not being in use. I was surprised to see
Right,
it phrased that
so-
way. So we've recategorized
So Tammy and
those.
I are updating this listing, so it is correct.
Okay.
So do we know who has the number that ends in 3074?
Do you want the voicemail set up? That's the one you called and the voicemail wasn't set up.
3074, is that a 778?
717-688-3074.
Let's just make sure they set up their voicemail.
It's
We'll put it
attributed.
that way.
It's currently attributed to the council president.
But it has to be like a public discussion item, but just make sure.
Oh, okay.
Make sure that somebody sets up their voicemail.
Right. And then some of those that aren't listed are the auto attendants for the police department and the administration.
Oh, okay.
There's like 4 separate numbers that were billed for, but they're for the auto receptionist and our
So that's how that
voicemail coming
works.
in.
Okay. All right.
So we don't know whose number that is?
I think we do probably. It's more on necessarily me.
I'm not seeing it on the list here.
So
There's
I-
a few that I did reach out to Verizon for just to verify, so that could be one of them.
Yeah, I don't want to make light of someone's, you know,
71.
No, I'm
lack
not
of doing
trying
it.
to.
Okay.
I want to know who
All
has
right.
that phone.
688, what was that again?
688-3074.
Yeah, that was formerly Jake's phone. Yeah, and I believe that has been transferred to another department. I'm not sure if that's in your department there or not.
The only one we
can
have is
check.
Pete's phone.
That's a different one, yeah.
Yeah, that's the only one we have in planning.
That's one of the ones we'll verify that for sure.
Okay.
While you're looking at your notes, I'll point out the cable television franchise. Tammy Murdorf, our accountant one, reviewed the last 4 payments of the cable franchise, and we determined that we actually were underestimating that revenue source. So between the third quarter and fourth quarter of 2021 and the first and second quarter of 2022, that actually was $78,800. So we raised that revenue expectation from $45,000 to about $80,000, which is not necessarily reflected, or is it reflected? I think it is reflected, actually, in your draft, too. Double check that.
Do you have that line?
321-800.
It still says 45.
Yeah.
So we're increasing that
So
to
in the third,
78.
so in the third draft, that'll go up to 78,000, something close to that.
We had
Double check
change
here.
on our current deficit of 23,000. Am I doing my math right? 28,000? 30, I can't. So it's a $33,000 difference.
Yeah, the new number is 78,870 is what we've put in there.
Great. What's our deficit on the 16th?
The old number was 45, so it's from 45,000 to 78,870. While you're looking at your notes, the definition of inland marine is the property coverage for material, products, or equipment that moves or is transportable and/or is instrumental in transportation or communication. It also covers property owned by others but is stored at the policyholder's location. So for example, if we have something in our impound that belongs to someone else, inland marine covers that property while we are in possession of it.
Yeah, I'm just kind of working through the list here. We were talking about the phones there a minute ago, and I guess wherever those two phone numbers belong to, if they do, we need to relocate them there from 400 and 324, which is still as it was. We shouldn't really account for something like that twice.
The utility adjustments got made.
Yeah, no, I'd looked at that earlier.
Good.
And I kind of think there were some others that were even made. I think I think you adjusted the electric and maybe the natural gas, the public works plan also, even though we hadn't gotten there. I think that was adjusted from
Yeah,
last draft.
you had raised those last time, yeah.
Yeah, I think we looked at the lines with the building, but you went ahead and did the other ones too, which is the way to do that.
The answer to your question on why corporate donations were so high this year, the answer to that is there were several large reimbursements as it related to the South Street project. So Columbia Gas is in that category at $5,000. GMA contributed to South Street, $43,000. There were two memorial benches at about $1,400 each. And Habby also contributed $17,500 for the Inner Loop project. So that is why that is around $70,000, which is also why we do not budget $70,000 in 2023.
Great.
The locations of the cell towers are 10 Hanover Street, 400 York Street, 101 York Street, 99 Chambersburg, 1 Springs, 199 Carlisle, 399 Carlisle, 399 Hanover, 101 Baltimore, 198 Baltimore, 511 Baltimore, and 200 Steinway.
Memorized. Got it. Ms. English, thank you for your notes on those stormwater properties. That's very helpful. Thank you. That's into my notes.
Yeah, I'm on the last bit in there. Those are just making sure. Okay. Does anyone have, or if you want a few more minutes to look at those, but most all of them were things that we had kind of addressed last time. Although several of them, candidly, were a relatively small dollar value. A lot of them are relatively small dollar value or things that were explained. There are items there about the revenue, for instance, for things like the drug task force, which is money in, money out. We've received reimbursements like that. A lot of them are reimbursement items or clarifications. Okay. My notes reflected that we had stopped at line 409,373.
Yes.
So if everyone is satisfied with where we're at, that's where we should go to. 409,373, we are within
Page 21 of the second draft.
That's what I said. I was looking at page 21, and we're within general government expenditures. So this covers a lot of things, kind of that just go to the central part of the government, really. So 409373 dealt with the maintenance and repair of the buildings. A lot of those are fairly repetitive items. Sometimes we see bubbles in that if something fails. I know we've had some HVAC issues the past few years at different times. So if
Those
you're
are
looking
growing in number.
if you're looking at actual expenditures, we replaced the furnace, correct, but not the HVAC, not the air conditioning.
HVAC is becoming
No, I see the
burden.
I see the service calls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was replaced in 2010, 2011 when we had our renovations. So it's,
It'd be nice to think you could get
Its
more.
life is probably close to being done.
It's sad because they just don't build things the way they used
They
to.
do not.
that's right.
And there's someone that recently replaced one that I think was from the 90s and it lasted a solid 30 years, but now you're looking at 10 or 15 years. Okay, so I guess that's something as we look forward, we're going to have to try to
That'll be a big ticket item if you have to replace
get an
it.
evaluation of the compressors and the condensers for that system. Yeah, that could be.
We're not there yet, but I fear it's coming.
Well, at some point, it'll be prudent to try to get an odd concept of the ballpark you would be in for replacement and start to look at that against what we're spending each year, because you'll probably always have something, but it gets excessive. 49374, repairs and maintenance machinery. Again, most of those are pretty standard items that we're required to undertake. Generators, elevators, all those types of things. Yep, postal machine in 384. The county lot in 388, so that's our payment to the county, which has a corresponding revenue line. Bank charges, I'm on to page 22 now, bank charges and fees.
Ms. Marshall wants to update you on that line item 390.
390, okay.
So what is in the,
That's the bank fees. that we
Remote
talked
data
about today.
capture and stop
So-
payments.
so that's actually, we just updated it today. We're projecting a jump in that next year, up to an increase of 5,770. And we will be, that's for PSN transaction fees. We're working on enabling online payments for permits and licenses, and they have a 3% per transaction fee. So we will also be proposing a fee increase for some of the permits and licenses, not all of them, to cover that fee transaction amount so that you're not getting, so people aren't getting, when they go to pay, for a permit, they're not getting, here's your land use fee, here's your building fee, here's your sign fee, and then, oh, here's this other fee. It'll all just sort of be wrapped in together. But we're covering that cost with the permits.
So this is related to the credit card transaction.
Yeah, PSN is payment service now.
Oh, yeah, I'm
But
sorry.
they'll get hit even if you're paying by check or cash.
Correct. Well, we don't accept cash.
That's true. Money order.
Money order or cash, yes.
All right, yeah, I mean, I think despite my personal misgivings about that way of doing it, you have to have some method. So, and I would agree that anytime you start to see plus this, plus that, people get more and more irritated as that goes on. That line historically has usually been a few $1,000s, looking back over a number of years. So,
So the expense will increase by 5,000 and change, but then there'll be a correlating.
We're updating,
the fee schedule.
we'll be
to-
updating the fee schedule
to
and
deal with
the
that.
revenues for the fees to
Okay.
compensate for that.
But yeah, looking back over a number of years, I mean, it usually runs around $5,000 or even $6,000. Some years it was light. But I think that year was probably, if I look, now 2021. Okay, not COVID exactly. Not 2020 as I thought. Dues, memberships, and subscriptions. Anybody have any questions about?
Before that,
Sorry,
why
yeah.
was 409, 410 struck in the second draft?
That would have been.
410 is judgment and damages. Is that what you're asking about? Yeah, we're not going to use that line item.
Okay.
Not anticipating any suits next year.
So I show that
okay.
I show that as 0 for many years. I think that well, in all fairness, there were times when that was budgeted because we knew that something was coming.
Yeah.
So it seemed prudent to budget for it. There are a number of different dues, subscriptions, and memberships under this portion. Does anybody have any questions? These deal with all different organizations that we are involved in for various employees.
Yep.
Okay, that takes us to contracted IT network services for that department. Pretty straightforward. Continuing education, 409, 460, that's for this portion of the professional staff. That is something that's increased a lot in the past few years. I guess I'm questioning or just trusting that we're getting something out of that. PELRAS and so forth. I can't speak very much to it.
PELRAS is an excellent conference.
That's why I can't really
on
speak
labor
to any of
relations.
these conferences. I think I attended PML one time when it was here. So at that point, I guess that's the end of 409. Does anyone have any additional questions with Department 409?
For 409, 452, the contracted IT network services, why do we see a reduction there from last year?
So some of those were moved to other departments to better reflect the actual cost of
It's a lot more
supporting those
specific. Like
departments.
even the mayor and the council have these things.
Yep, I added
on
stuff for that very purpose.
There are lines
Right.
that basically didn't exist anymore. It's kind of like when we get into the staffing and all the various types of overtime and so forth. It's just more specific than it was.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you know, when we use zero-based budgeting, which means we start at 0 every year, and we evaluate what each department actually costs to provide the services. And so we broke that out to better reflect that. While you're looking at your notes, the adjustments, I got really large. The adjustments that we talked about with the fees and the new estimated revenue for Comcast franchise, we're actually looking at a deficit of $49,000 with our new numbers that we tweaked since Thursday when you received this.
Okay. Great.
All right, so that would take us into Department 410, which is our police department. That starts at the bottom of page 23. Of course, you have the chief's salary there. And with a number of these things, do realize this isn't true of many different places where you'll see individual salaries, but then they also get reflected in various other areas where they're paid for different time they work with incentive and various other things. It's just a little bit more elaborate than it used to be. So this budget does envision the addition of 2 patrol officers, which would take the patrol officer quantity to 10.
It would take the entire department to 14 sworn. That would include the chief.
10 patrol officers, 2 detectives, 2 sergeants, plus the chief. Is that correct?
No.
No, it's not. 9.
Yes.
Okay.
Also chief.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm included in the 14 number.
Right.
I used to always like to do the +1.
I'd be more than happy to go to 50 and take myself out of the...
I always did it that way because it just was a cleaner way to do it. Everybody would talk about patrol officers, detectives, and sergeants, and it would get very confusing. So this is a 13 + 1 staffing, and currently we're staffed at 11 + 1. Now, I know one revision that was made since draft 1 was that the 2 hires are written in here at essentially a 9-month
Correct.
payment schedule, and that's not the first time we've done that, to reflect the reality that in order to hire, it will take us time to work through that.
And I'll say on top of that's a very true reflection of what would happen, and we may be able to go even maybe 1 at 9 and 1 at 8. I think that it would behoove us to separate our hirings a little bit if we can, by a month. That way there's no question as to seniority down the road. And it would save, not a lot, but a couple $1,000s over the long run. So if we went 1 at 9 and 1 at 8, that might help save a little bit more. And I think that's a realistic assumption by the time we get through the civil service process and get a background done, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think this is the moment, we've kind of talked about this before, but I'd like to bring it up again, just to make sure if there's anyone has any misgivings. With our hiring efforts over the past number of years, that I would be looking at, this would be the time that we would go to hiring people that are not certified and sending them to the academy. And I would want to know if anyone on council specifically has any misgivings about that. I think that the chief knows, and we've talked about this many times, that there are a number of positives to doing this. The big negative is essentially that you're paying someone to go through the academy. So there are some issues there that we'll have to address with the Teamsters Local 776 and how that would work, how that person would be paid. And then there's the issue of attempting to retain those people. But at current, we're counting on doing the same thing we wouldn't want someone to do to us. Because we're counting on taking their police officer or finding someone, which does happen, but we know it's very infrequently. We just had a hire recently that put himself through. But it's just not the norm. And to expect people to do that, to take months off from whatever they're doing and pay their way through hack, it's just not what's going on in that industry.
I just had a conversation with Hack's Academy director on another matter. I believe, and please don't quote me, but I think she told me she's down to 5 or 6 pre-service cadets in the academy, which means haven't been hired yet. Even the ones that started pre-service have been spoken for now. To your point about it will cost the borough some money to send them to the academy, that is absolutely true, but part of that money is reimbursable. Academy tuition the majority of that's reimbursable. I think it's 75%, and then I think that the expenses and other things are reimbursable at a 50% rate.
Yeah, the actual academy is not nearly as expensive as you would think. I want to say it's around $6,000 to $8,000.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Depending on where you end up going and being able to get a spot, and then you're going to have like if let's say we couldn't get somebody into Hack, we may have some housing costs if we send somebody to Indiana or 40 Fort or one of those places. There will be some housing costs that are reimbursable, but part of that is reimbursable. So
I guess what I'm getting at is I would like to put on the agenda for November's meeting a motion to direct civil service to start the process. We have to get information from Labor Council, including essentially the language that we'll need to revise the civil service manual, rules and regulations in order to make that happen, which will not be, it'll be significant. There will be a lot of changes that go with that. Yes.
I know other municipalities do this, and the chief and I talked about it when we met a while ago about diversifying the department. And I guess a question I have is, if you're paying for the academy, in their contract, can you be explicit about how long they give you?
Yes.
And is that something?
I think it can be. I think the issue comes down to the enforceability of it.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think it's always changing too. It used to be that you could require a 2-year commitment.
Yeah.
But there's some attorneys who are going to tell you, well, that piece of paper is no good. There's others who are going to say, no, that's a contract. They have to honor it. And I think that's something that Harry could probably speak a little better to, as far as, how long we can compel them. And if they left, I think I've seen conditions on, if you leave this department and go to another police department, well, you owe us that back. But if you decide you're not going to be in law enforcement anymore for a certain period of time, then they don't have to reimburse. I've seen them written so many different ways. And what's enforceable and not enforceable in them, I don't know.
Mr. Lawver has had experience with that. Previously, he spoke to that previously. He said that we used to require 2 years, but when they leave, we really don't have the ability to chase them down for it.
There is a training agreement in the contract, unless that was removed, Charles. It's an addendum to the contract, a training agreement, if we send them to the academy. At least there wasn't the last one. I think it carried through.
Does it increase our possibility of diversifying?
Absolutely.
So that we could,
because
it'd be great to have like.
I think you and I talked before. It is
more women.
Yeah, it is generally the white males that put themselves through the police academy by the vast majority. So if we're looking to diversify, the only way we're going to potentially get those candidates is to test uncertified folks.
How do we go about recruiting those people then? Like somebody who is Spanish speaking or females, for example. How do we?
Well, I think that we can reach out to some of the I'll use the term headhunter agencies that specialize in recruitment of minorities. We did that last time through we used the. I think it's discoverpolicing.org, and at that time they had an additive that we could add on to all our advertisements and have this thing sent to some agencies that specialize in recruitment. And there are minority police associations. There's black police officer associations, for example, in different areas, and I think there's female police officer associations in different areas. We could reach out to them as well. But we do definitely stand a much better chance of attracting those folks with an open hiring as opposed to a closed. You have to be certified first.
Thank you.
I just think from a local advertising perspective, it's just so different to say, hey, if you have you're 18 or whatever the age requirement is, and you have a high school diploma or GED, and you can do this, you take the test, as opposed to having to say, hey, you're Act 120 certified or eligible for certification and you've completed the class. It just narrows it down to almost nothing. So I would think that it inherently would open that up dramatically.
And if it's kind of off, or if I may, it's kind of off the subject a little bit, but if you bring somebody in who has never been a police officer before, never been to the police academy, and they can go through that civil service process with the test and interview and everything that's attached to it, and still come out as a hireable person on that list above somebody that may have went to the academy, that's a sharp individual, and we want to get them.
Well, and that's a lot of the process and what will change will include the type of test that we purchase. So currently we're purchasing a test that's really designed for your knowledge and based of police department things, and this would be more attuned to your abilities, your effective ability to communicate and things of that nature. I think of all the civil service testing we talked about when people go into fire departments. What do you go in? Well, it's mathematics up to a certain level. It's communication. It's these types of things. Reasoning, provided A and B, what is C? Those types of questions, as opposed to more specialized content questions, which are candidly what we send in the academy for. So I think it does give the opportunity to diversify the department significantly. But candidly, it's just also this is what we have to do.
And I also wonder too, Chief, if is there a movement at all to try to recruit not just more women or Spanish-speaking people or people of color, but also people who have a background in social work, in terms of trying to have people on staff who have a background to deal with people who have mental health issues and
I don't know if there's as much of a movement towards that as, is training once you're in, because, we refer to, I'm a big fan of CIT. Mr. Moon and I have had several discussions about, mental health and law enforcement, and the law enforcement officer needs to be trained to the point, or the police officer, public servant, needs to be trained to point that they're that bridge to those professional services, and so there's not as much of a move for that. It'd be nice if we attracted that, but as far as a move there, I think that there have been so many aspects of police recruiting studied lately, and so many papers out there. I was just reading one and started reading it on rural policing and rural police recruiting, and then when I looked at it and saw those from 2018, and we have a whole new ballgame right now, so I don't even know if this is going to be worthwhile, even though it's a federal study that commenced in 2018. So, the answer is probably no. That's a long-winded no, I guess.
There's some funding at the county level for a co-response program. When it's initiated, it will probably start in Gettysburg and then move out to the rest of the county. The issue is, like every other industry, staffing. What the funding is able to provide for is not a competitive wage for what our health providing partners would need to offer. So that has sort of stalled for now, but there is some momentum from the state to fund that program. We might see it in the next year. I'm not sure.
I think that the last communication that I had referenced that from Mr. Bartz at MHID, Mental Health and Intellectual Disabilities, is they have a candidate. I think now it's for the co-responder in Adams. I think it's now what Mr. Moon said is, even though the grant dollars are there, can we fund them to the point the person is willing to accept the position?
The degree requirements sort of mandate a certain level of income, and that's not what the program can fund.
Sure.
So that's where they're trying to find the balance there.
Thank you both. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess, does anyone have any misgivings about pursuing non-certified candidates? Because we'll put that on the agenda.
No.
And kind of separate that out.
I don't know if this is an appropriate question, but if we're talking about increasing the police department from 11 plus 1 to 13 plus 1, what are the expectations then of the overtime that we pay right now?
Overtime should be significantly reduced from especially shift fills, and part-time should be significantly reduced from shift fills. Ultimately, and this is going to take some negotiation with the union and some other things, I would still like to look at a couple corporal positions, and I think I put that at the end of that thing I handed you last week, because ultimately I would love to see these two positions separated from that squad setting, that 11.5-hour days, the A squad and B squad, to a kind of a rotating mid-shift supervisor position where we have and I'm just pulling these out without looking at numbers, but somebody that works Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on daytime from, a 10-hour day, from 11 a.m. to whatever 10 hours from that would be, so 9 p.m. And then the other position would work from 7 at night till 5 in the morning, or 6 at night till 4 in the morning, and that person could work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we're covering our heavier times. We're putting people out through the heart of the day where we get the majority of our calls, and then those folks aren't working, Sundays, Monday or Tuesday for the most part, because we may tend to have less calls there. And those two positions, what I would envision as corporals, could then be negotiated into a 10-hour day set schedule that maybe they rotated. And I think that we could make it attractive enough that there would be some officers interested, and then it gives us a little flexibility, because then what could happen is if they need to bump up to work at daytime, now granted it's only going to be a 10-hour daytime as opposed to 11.5-hour daytime, but we could bump them up to fill day, we could bump that down to fill night, because it's not that much of a shift, it's not a whole shift change. And that's common across most places that have, well, I shouldn't say most, some places that have these, even though we do work 11.5 hour, the schedule's 11.5 hour now, I call them 12s, or half a day. A lot of places that have those have another shift at a different hour. Like their overnight tour is a 12-hour shift, but their daytime tour is an 8-hour shift. So there's a mix in scheduling, if you will, or a mix in hours work. And I think that if we could tweak this, if we could make these corporal positions in the middle work where they could bump up and down, make it attractive enough as a first supervisory position, and I think we could get more officers out during the heart of the time where we need folks. So that I think would significantly reduce part-time and overtime.
And
Still gonna have the part-time.
holiday pay as well, too, because that's a big ticket
Well,
item, right?
the schedule's the schedule for holidays, and we're,
But holiday overtime.
What's that?
Holiday overtime.
Holiday overtime, yes, holiday overtime, yeah, the holiday pay. probably-
Holiday overtime would be reduced, is what you're
Yeah, holiday
Suggest.
overtime should be reduced.
Okay.
There's still, the holiday pay of the double time and a half for the holiday, or
Yeah.
whatever we're paying them now, that's scheduled, and we'd have a hard time putting them off of that if they were scheduled that holiday contractually. But as far as the holiday overtime, it should lessen that. We're still going to have the part-time expense and some overtime expenses for special events, and we're always going to have that, no matter, we could have 25 police officers, and we're still going to have to pay overtime and part-time to fill some of these special event slots. But generally, I could see a reduction, overtime reduction in part-time usage.
Yeah, I would think, I guess where I go, Chief, is that, we just kind of had a discussion about corporals and adding things and so forth, and what this is built around is we just finished labor negotiations. The police officers through their union feel very strongly about their shift schedule. It's very clear that they feel very strongly. In order to fill that shift schedule, it takes 8 patrol officers. Okay, so when we talk about 13 plus 1, right off the bat, to fill the shift schedule correctly, you have to have 8 people. And if you don't, you're creating yourself a problem. And I watched many years when we did that. So then you have 2 detectives, that takes you to 10. And then you have 2 sergeants that supervise, that takes you to 12. And I think the reality in this budget is we know that we have someone who's injured. And so we're doing 13 for the provision that essentially we can fill the shift schedule should that officer remain injured. When I came on board here, the staffing level was 9 plus 1. So that was a chief, 2 sergeants, and a detective. And so that was only 5 patrol officers on the schedule, which was completely inadequate. So you were counting on filling 3 slots every single time with part-time. Really, it was envisioned as part-time. And I think that we know, Chief, I think you would agree, that while we have some reliable part-time people, we're never going to have the quantity of part-time help to fill those kinds of hours.
And I would never belittle our part-time officers whatsoever. They're professional, they do a good job. But the bottom line is things fall through the cracks when you do part-time and fill shifts. They may handle a burglary call, let's say. So they go take an initial in the burglary call, and generally the less severe things, and maybe a burglary is not the right example. Let's say a retail theft call. They go handle retail theft. They take the initial in that retail theft. There's some follow-up that needs done from a patrol level. Well, they're not back in for 7 or 8 days. So if they don't say something to their supervisor to hand that off to somebody else, there's a relatively minor crime, but it's still a concern of the person that called that was the complainant or victim on that doesn't get any attention for 8 days. And that's the pitfall you have with use of part-time. Whereas if it's a full-timer, even if it's their last day, they're back on in 2 or 3 days and they can get back on it.
I just think the ability to fill even one position with part-timers is just difficult, as opposed to relying on them to fill when people are out for various reasons.
And yeah, if you look at our scheduling now, we rely very heavily on one particular part-timer because his availability is there and the other ones aren't. And even though we have 4 other ones, they're working full-time jobs elsewhere. So if they're working there, they can't fill a shift here.
So to kind of jump back to the question here, I think there's a lot of support to see you get these 2 new officers, but there also needs to be a dramatic drop in overtime expenditures. If we couple 2 new officers with our ability to offer shifts first to part-timers as opposed to full-timers with the new contract, we need to see a pretty substantial drop in overtime usage.
I understand that, and I would do my best to try to make that happen.
Okay.
I don't think there's going to be the overtime.
We're going to get there in a few minutes here. I assume we're moving on from the first item that we're going to discuss here today.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, one point there I was going to say, kind of pages 24 through 37 are basically one discussion. Because it's all police staffing. It runs the whole way from 410, 112 is where the salary for full-time starts. And it just comes down to the number of different items we have. And that all those pages list each individual person is what it amounts to. And then 37 is where we wrap up with the last, I think, of the overtime, which is for the traffic ramp. So I think what Mr. Moon is trying to get at is the 2022 budget included $168,425 for overtime. And if we read this correctly, the 2023 request is $196,351. So like that would be an increase in overtime.
No, I would like to correct that record there. The budgeted amount for 2022 was $127,000, and we had to make a special allocation to keep up with
we
it.
added,
Right.
yeah. So with
We
the
had to make a
allocation,
special
that's correct.
allocation to account for the fact that that budget was exhausted pretty quickly, and that's not through something we could control. I understand that.
So if we have the full-time positions up to a point where that person can be employed and we're not filling the shift, a $70,000, $75,000 increase is pretty large, and we probably should be heading in the opposite direction.
I would agree, and I did not pull that overtime out of this.
So I think we need to take a look at that. as we go to
I
a
agree
future
that overtime
draft.
should go down, because this year we basically filled,
You filled a shift all year.
we filled a shift all year on overtime.
No, that's what I'm looking at. Like, if we're gonna do this, and I think that's what, my kind of understanding is that that's more or less what the officers would like to see. It makes sense from a management standpoint to fill the shifts. When we go back to, and the other thing about this whole discussion that can be very difficult from a public point of view is what we're talking about is authorized strength. We're not talking about officers in patrol cars, because there have been times when we have not been able to do that with hiring processes. I mean, our last hiring process, we went out twice. There will be delays, but I mean, we went from 2015, our authorized strength was 11 plus 1. So at that time, that was chief, 2 sergeants, detective, took you down, and it was 8 patrol officers to fill those 8 holes. And then we went through 16, 17, and 18 at 9 plus 1. In 19, we started working our way back. We went back to 11. In 20, we had 11. 21, with everything that went on with COVID, we dropped to 10. And then in 22, we were back to 11 plus 1. So what has changed? Well, we do have an officer who's injured, and we're trying to address that, basically. And then the other issue that came up is our 2022 11 number didn't include 1 detective, it included 2, which left a hole in the shift schedule. We kept the same number of people, but it created an issue. And part of that discussion really is when it comes down to it, I think at that time I said, like, well, I'm not going to dictate to the chief how he uses his staffing. But, I think that we've looked at the past year or so, and I think there is an argument to be made for 2 investigators in the capacity of things that we've been dealing with. So if we're to do that, given our situation and what we can control, what we can't, if we're going to fill the shift schedule, it's going to be with 13 people. That's what I see. And as a result, we just have to see that overtime drop.
And I believe I can drop overtime, and I wanted to, and I talked at the Steinway bid a little bit about this. I think we're losing community traction. and a little bit of support because of staffing levels, because we can't complete the community relations and crime prevention events. I can't staff some of these things. National Night Out is kind of expensive. There's a lot of overtime because we don't have the people to work it without bringing them in on overtime. So if we want to do more things, community safety fairs, and I try to make sure the patrol rotates down to, like, there's been a number of events at the rec park. So I try to make sure patrol gets down there and walks through, but that's not a guarantee. And if that's not a guarantee, and I can't get folks down there because they're tied up on calls, I think with this staffing, we can make some inroads back. I've heard from a lot of people, we just want to see a policeman throwing football with our kids.
Cool. Can we do it at regular time, though?
Yes, that's what I'm getting at. I would love to see that. I would love to see the policemen stop and shooting hoops down at the park. When I was in Colorado, I had a policeman that was a skater, and they had a pretty good skate park down there, and he skated with the kids. So what's he doing that? Kids loved it. People flocked to it. That's what I'd like to see happen here, and we can do that with this increase, and I believe we can bring down part-time. Well, we may not be able to bring down part-time because of the filling of everything, being vacations and personals and things like that. But I think that we can bring the full-time overtime figure down. I know we can bring that down some. Now, how far we can bring it down will depend on part-time availability as well, but we can bring it down for sure.
I mean, from a budgetary standpoint, if we're going to lay out basically another $200,000 and 2 more officers, in overtime figures, we have to see a drop. This budgeted request is $196,000. We have to be dropping into the $100,000 range or a little below, I would think. But it's something, Chief, I want to give you time to deal with it. Okay. We don't have to do it on the spot here. And I do want you to know that, I appreciate your creativity with the concept of corporals and everything. But I think what we saw through labor negotiations was that they like their schedule. I don't want to create any problems with that. And if we're going to create corporals, that would be a civil service process, and the civil service rules and regs would have to be amended.
Yeah.
So I think I'd like to get the ship full of people, get it righted here, because we're going to have some challenges if this happens and we hire people. Even going to non-certified individuals, I anticipate this. We're going to have bumps on the road. This is going to be a new process. And, an FTO program with someone just coming out of the academy, I'm sure is different than an FTO program with somebody who is coming from somewhere else.
It will be.
For positive and negative, right? They learn our way, but at the same time, they just don't have the street experience that they might have had.
I would say that our last experience with the person going through FTO coming right out of the academy was very positive.
Was positive, right?
Very positive, because
sample size
he's just a good kid.
Yeah, right.
I can't say anything else, but and he did well. But I can't say that that's going to be the way it is for everyone. And we may have to take a little more time on some things.
So I think what I'm trying to tell you is, from my perspective on the council and things that we do have authority over, like civil service and so forth, rather than getting things into some sort of flux and potentially causing issues with, the labor organization in that front, I think I'd like to prioritize getting things filled, and if we're going to do that, and get things righted and get people oriented to the kind of policing where we do have that regularity. Because I do think that does speak to it, where people are used to, and our part-timers are very good. I think that the small number of them, while that's a detriment to filling the schedule, at the same time, for many people, they are familiar faces. So I think it's helpful in that regard. But I don't like that we rely on them so much that it really causes a problem.
It does.
For us, and I think for them sometimes. People they don't want anybody out alone, right? So they feel like they want to be in, and if we fill the shift schedule, that wouldn't be necessary unless we have someone taking off, essentially.
The first iteration of the paperwork that I handed you last week, that schedule does have those 2 officers in the 11.5-hour rotation, and how they would be utilized. Well, how that spot would be utilized. So, and you can see that it does pull a part-timer out of there for a number of days a week. So overtime, I'll relook at the numbers. I know some of them. All the overtime numbers that Charles adjusted for this schedule were predicated upon looking at the old schedule and then just getting hours. Now, my only, the qualifier to that is he moved my numbers in there, and my numbers were based on the 22 salary labor burden rate. So I took a number of hours that I came up with. Some of the things won't change. The holiday worked is
That's
what's
what
going to be holiday work.
Yeah, you should understand that, like, no one's envisioning, special events.
Yeah,
Okay, or overtime with
Yeah.
special events depleting. No one's envisioning that. But, the other things where we should be filling that, when someone has court, that we'd be filling that with more part-timers, that when they have,
Well, the court overtime is only to attend court. That court overtime figure does not cover people.
not cover who's...
And honestly, I would love to envision that if that I shouldn't say I'd love to envision,
we can't control that.
No, we can't.
No.
And that number, honestly, with 2 additional officers, may tick up based on arrests, on-view things.
So just more of the subjective chunks. Like, if we're going to do this, we're going to need a commitment to bring that down, and we're going to need a commitment to follow it. The last thing I want to do, and we all are aware of, the borough is in a better financial position right at the moment because of what happened with the rescue plan. That will be exhausted. That time will come. I think the reality is a lot of those extra dollars we have were kind of, although they're not ARPA dollars, it's confusing because the way the federal government requires you to do it, but we're looking at more one-time projects. If we're going to continually fund this number of positions, we have to have kind of a counterbalance here. We want to give the community what they need, but we also have to make sure we're just responsible about how we do it.
Right,
So
the
we
way I
can't have
see
a runaway overtime scenario.
I do understand.
And that's the way I see it, is if you're going to put it into this pool of money, then you've got to somehow, when that money is not available anymore, the taxpayers are going to be paying for that. And so we have to reduce the overtime. I mean, there's just...
Yeah, I want to hire people and have them be here and have this a place where they
Right.
can make a career. So I don't want anything hanging over somebody's head, that it would be, 4 years from now, that there'd be a problem. I don't want that to be the
Right.
situation.
I understand the holiday work. I just don't understand when you have holidays, like why the overtime. I mean, how...
So the holiday work is currently carried in an overtime category. Tammy, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, please. On the page on our timesheets where it says the officer worked the holiday, they put the regular hours in up the top where there's regular hours, and then in the bottom where it's overtime hours, there's a holiday worked category that is 2 times or 1.5 times. It's 2 times.
Hours worked on a holiday is at double time.
Yeah, so that's down below, and that's included in.
That's if you're called in.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
They'll get their 11.5 hours of straight time plus the hours that they work on a holiday an additional 2 times.
Got it.
At a double rate.
And
then there's overtime.
But holiday overtime happens when, I'll tell you where we absolutely can't avoid it, Memorial Day Parade. If we have to bring people in to work the Memorial Day Parade that are full-time officers, we pay them at a holiday overtime rate if they're over top of their 11.5-hour shift. I think that was clarified here. So that
is, I guess I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So because of the rate they're paid, it'll fall into that category as opposed to falling into the special event rate.
Yes.
Or line item, because it's simpler to understand because of the amount they're paid. Otherwise, it would be terribly confusing.
And the other thing I can't control is, the call-ins for crimes that happen, things like that. If God forbid we have a shooting and that occurs on the 4th of July, let's say, and I have to bring in detectives for that, then they're going to get compensated at that holiday overtime rate if if they work that day.
But I think what Ms. Lawson's trying to get at is when we're outside of the Memorial Day,
like Christmas
4th
morning,
of July, Labor Day, when we're outside of basically the regular tourist season and when things are going to happen.
Like Christmas morning, for example.
How many people...
We're not paying overtime on any Christmas.
Okay. We're not.
We haven't for a while. there's been no overtime paid on Christmas.
Just those type, we need to be mindful of how we're doing that, and the budget has to reflect that.
And I think that in looking through this, I think that and just correct me if I'm way off here, I think the 410-176 is where you're looking for the
That's the regular overtime, where I would have to think that would drop off to, I mean, it's never going to drop to zero, but like, given how spread out this is over like 10 categories, it should almost be approaching it. Because all the other things deal with when we're covering on those scenarios where they have to be covered. So you're using 410-176 overtime regular. That means that given the new labor contract, we have a shift, we can't fill it with a part-timer, and we feel, first of all, we have a shift, we feel compelled it needs to be filled. Okay, this isn't Monday morning, but like, hey, we got to have somebody working, and we can't get a part-timer to do it. So that's where 410-176 comes in.
Yeah, and I mean, I can comfortably cut that with the addition of 2 officers.
Because there's a lot of other stuff. It's kind of helpful that it's been split out the way it is, because we know, right, the special events and things we cannot avoid. A certain number of, emergency call-ins are going to happen. Okay, the traffic grant is money in, money out. But that first category, I mean, on the request, it's almost $75,000. If we're able to drop that down, like we're close to balancing the budget. That's what it comes down to.
But how much do we need to drop that so I can take and look at it and see if I think that's conceivably, I'm going to have shifts like you say that have to be filled. Yeah. And there's no part-time.
It's hard for me to come up with a number out of the air, I guess.
I mean, are y'all looking for me to cut it in half? You looking for me to cut it more than in half?
We need to find $49,250.
But just in general principle, I think what I'm looking at is in general principle, how you calculate how much overtime you're planning to use in a year. I would think that and it sounded like you use kind of an hours.
Yeah, I always look at it in hours, and then I'll convert it or try to convert it into an estimate of what I need, because the other thing I have to go off of, like this year I didn't have a contract to go off of. So
I know it's going to be kind of a mess with this transition if we add people, but at the same time, I think you probably need to look at in the past year, how many regular overtime hours did we have? How many part-time hours did we have? And the biggest complication and difficulty with this is knowing if 2 people were working at the same time in that capacity, if that makes sense. That's kind of hard to know. Like if you had a part-timer and someone on overtime, that's hard to know. But if we look at those number of hours, and then how many of those could be covered with part-time, given the change in the contract, about how many hours does that take us down to, and about how much does that equate to? Rather than just kind of throwing dollar figures, to me, it makes more sense in hours.
I look at it, and I'll give you an example. Like today for the day shift, we had a part-timer filling because we have an officer on vacation, and then we had a full-timer in on overtime because the sergeant had to go to child safety seat refresher training today. So daytime today was people that generally wouldn't work during the day.
Right, so it's 23 hours.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I think that's what we need to do.
I could sit here tonight without looking and say that I could probably comfortably cut the additional overtime. So what was the special appropriation, 68,000?
Yeah.
That position will not need to be filled if we hire 2 more folks. So there's 68 grand that could come out of that overtime budget off the top.
So I think the takeaway here is we'd like you to revisit all of the overtime asks here before our next work session.
Well, where I'm at is if you have a calculation you use, it'd be cool to see it.
Well, I look at the average over the last several years, and then I take that and try to figure out where we're going to be.
Because I'm just poking around here, and I'm like, sure, yeah, you say that. Yeah, if we're not filling that position, yeah, that's an easy number to use. But candidly, like it should be lower than it was started at last year. Right? That just takes us back to the 2022 budgeted amount. It really should be lower than that. Do I know how much? Not really. But every time that we had a hole in the schedule, 1 out of 8 spots in the rotation was empty by design in 2022. So I know we didn't fill it all the time, but right, like there's a lot of gaps that were being filled that we don't have to fill because we're going to hire somebody.
And
That's how I'm looking at it. You
And
know,
I'll
if you have the
revisit it, and
person
we do,
there-
and I had I've had the sergeants, that's another thing this schedule does, is get my sergeants back to being able to supervise at night more, because we in an effort to save overtime, a lot of times we were filling day with
Well, I know that
with
depends upon like how it falls with the day of the week and so
Yeah.
forth. You know, sometimes it's prudent that you can just cover the second spot if somebody's out with a sergeant during the day, and sometimes it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. That's not such a good idea.
And if we didn't fill, we always made sure to let the detectives know. And the detectives, that's why when I give you the monthly report every month, I try to encapsulate in that how many calls detectives backed and actually covered from detectives. They're not just sitting back there, they listen to the radio as well. And if they're here, the problem with relying on the detectives to fill is if they're on an interview in Timbuktu that day, they're not here. I will re-examine it.
So I think we have 2 weeks till our next session, and that I think is something we'll have to talk about.
Yeah, I will get you new overtime numbers, and I just want to put out there that it's, I won't call it a guesstimate, but this is predicated on part-timers are going to be available to fill those necessary shifts that we have to fill for vacations and personal and sick and things like that.
And I understand that this year would be a learning experience.
Yes.
But just to be, I think we've kind of hit it a few times, to be very direct, there's no way to justify keeping the overtime budget where it is or anywhere close when we hire 2 people. Like
I absolutely see, and I understand that. I will.
I mean, it's not the whole purpose. We also want to make everyone, safe and so forth. But that, from a fiscal standpoint, it's like that's the glaring.
Well, I will sit down with my fine-tooth comb and go through this and reduce that overtime budget. As I said earlier, I can see a minimum reduction of that $68,000 right off the top. So.
Okay. So that would take us through page 37. That's all staffing, 24 to 37. Page 38 are almost all, we're dealing with benefit issues with the police department. The only one there is very hypothetical is always vacation buyback. That's always kind of a hypothetical. But you have to put in a number. We kind of talked about how we do that last session. If we go down to 39, that's just our vision insurance, which is contractual. Uniform allowance is contractual. FICA is required by law. That's page 40. Medicare required by law. That's page 41. 42, unemployment compensation, same thing. Page 43 is our healthcare, again, contractual. And let me look here.
You on page 43, Wes?
Yeah, the only thing to be aware of there is or one thing to be aware of is that we calculated both the new hires at single plan. So just be aware of that.
I'd like to touch on, can you back up to page 39, 191, 410, 191?
Yeah,
that is
sure.
benefit uniform allowance. So that would be, and I like the figure I see in there that we've spent this year, but that may be the $20,000 there. That would include equipping the 2 new officers. So I mean, that's why that's elevated there this year as opposed to, I see the explanation, there's one I gave a few years ago, which is fine, I'd still love to do that, but we have to equip the new officers, so that's where that would come in
I presume that's why that was elevated.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that plain because that wasn't the explanation in there, and
that's true, that's dated,
my fault, so.
Dated shift from the old style to the new style of uniform, that's still in there. But yeah, I can assume that. So 43 was the health insurance, which is contractual. 44 is your pension contribution, which again, there's a corresponding revenue line for that. reimbursement with the state for part of that. Life and short-term disability, again, that's page 45, all contractual. 46, dental, pension for non-uniformed. So we get down through 410, 200, that's our last, I would say, fixed expense in terms of how many people you have impacts what the expense is. It's a multiplication problem. You have operating supplies there, postage, miscellaneous, which is your detective restock, your community relations giveaway stuff. And then gas, I feel like that was one that maybe we elevated or not.
Yeah.
That's why I had to pull to my chart there and look. That was one thing we kind of looked at last time across the board is your natural gas, your electricity, and your gasoline. You just have to be aware that they're going to be high. That's the way it is right now. I'm looking to see. So that was a change from past years, but not from the first draft. Okay. Any issues on 46? We're starting to exit out of the fixed costs. 47 starts with protection of persons and property. So that's your ammunition. So we have to purchase firearms with bringing people on board, I assume.
We are probably good in handguns, actually. The big raise there and the big ask there, and I think this is our biggest, outside of personnel, is our biggest ask this year. This is for the purchase of active shooter gear. And, you know, we have all our officers trained to respond to these active shooter things now, but we need to make sure that we have the equipment now to make that response successful. So when I'm talking here, I'm talking helmets for the officers. We currently have antiquated helmets and not enough, that don't fit. They're not current. Shields for all the cars. We have money in the budget this year to buy a couple shields. Based on prices, we're probably only going to be able to get one. But we need to get shields for all the cars. And when I say shields, they're the bigger shields that are about 3 feet long that block bullets.
So is that 35,000, is that based on a bid? Like, did you?
That's based on, I reached out, out to our supplier.
Before you answer, is that enough? I mean, are we going to end up seeing a bill for more once the order is placed?
I don't know based on inflation, Matt. It was enough when I devised the number. I got a quote. I pulled some things out of that we really don't need. And there's some of the things in there are prioritized. There's some door blocks, some rams. There's things that we should have in every car that we've got from other sources now. The fire company gave us some Halligan tools, for example, that they were going to throw out.
So you didn't get the. I was going to tell you to buy Pro Bars, but I guess not.
And
like they're the, yeah.
So you know
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking with the officers recently, and they we were on the ship, and we noticed how they use clips. And I said, oh yeah, we use those to hold doors. So like the crash things are in there. Like we use $2 Harbor Freight clips to hold the doors open. You're talking about like a Hydra-Ram, like that used to be like okay.
No, not.
I wasn't sure what your Hydra
regular rams, door rams, some instruments to hold doors open, helmets, shields. I don't believe that I budgeted for gas masks in there. I'm kind of losing my train of thought. That was in my original ask, but I think I pulled that. And that stuff is very expensive.
So you have a current quote?
I do have a quote that actually includes, I mean, here's some prices. These are some of the things the guys sent me. So a Blackhawk Dynamic Entry Monoshock Ram, $399 for 2 of them. The helmets are $450 to $550 a piece. Hooligan tools are $309 a piece. We don't.
So is that quote going to be valid through January 1st? Can you place an order on January 1st, and would this budget cover it?
Yes, and what this budget doesn't cover, I won't spend over the the $35,000 that we have there. The priority is shields and helmets. And, you know, as President Heyser said, if we need to go to Harbor Freight and get clips to hold doors open, we'll do that.
There's things where you can do that, and there's things where you can't.
Yeah, there's
I mean,
there's
you're
some
talking
things.
about shields and helmets.
Right. You can't.
I'm reminded, oh my gosh, maybe 05 or 06. Like, I'd be curious, people we have that are still on board that have been here that long, it wouldn't shock me to find out if that equipment was equipment we owned. I'm thinking when they thought the Klan was coming in 05 and 06, and they had the issue with the artist demonstration and the lynching of the flag, and everything got big. And I remember all that equipment came out, which I'd never seen before. And
I
it
will
wouldn't
say-
shock me if it was the same stuff we currently possess.
I will say there is a big, big, big difference to riot shields, riot batons, riot helmets from active duty response gear.
Ballistic.
Yeah, ballistic capable, you know, things that will stop bullets. Those riot shields are just plastic, push people back, keeping them from hitting you type things. The riot helmets are the same thing. They're designed to take an impact from a blow, not stop a 9mm bullet. The other thing that quote includes is plates, which are rifle plates that can be inserted into vests or have separate carriers. Some of the officers have those already. They've spent their own uniform allowance and equipment allowance to buy that. I really need to make sure that they all have those. Those are the things that stop rifle rounds. I just really need to make sure that the officers are equipped with those plates that they can throw on. We do have some things set up, just visits to schools, just so that the officers can get the idea of the layouts of schools. And I've been working with the new director for Gettysburg School District.
But that's not in this item.
No, it's not in this item. I'm just
I was like,
explaining.
that doesn't-
No, I'm just trying to tell you that we are working
Justification.
in this realm and justification and doing it, and we're still working on, and some of this stuff comes into play with that containment team that I talked about too. Some of these items will double with that, and we're almost to the point where we have the officers we feel that will be probably best suited for the containment team having their own weapons based on how we've budgeted over the years. We're buying one this year based on what we put in the budget.
Ms. Walton has a question.
Yeah, going back to the 05-06, I know that the college had hired their own security and had metal detectors, and they actually were working with, other law enforcement agencies, and the fire department was filled with SWAT teams.
That's what I remember standing in that.
State police and
in that
FBI were
bay.
there, and so our local
Yeah.
police were really involved in a periphery kind of
It
way.
was-
I mean, they didn't have to use them, but the firehouse was just filled with
I remember
SWAT teams,
I remember
and so-
some of our people at
Right.
the time had stuff out there. Yeah.
So my question is, when you have an active shooter, I mean, obviously the local law enforcement would respond first, but your SWAT teams would come in, right, from state police?
I am absolutely 100% hoping that's over by the time any state police TAC team can be spun up.
State police would come in, I mean.
They would not, they will, but they're not going to, their response won't be for an active shooter. Their response will be for a barricaded gunman, and there's a difference. The barricaded gunman response is what they did at Uvalde instead of an active shooter response. They felt they had him contained. When there's still active carnage going on, that's an active shooter. That is the responsibility of the officers on scene.
The problem the chief has in law enforcement is not much different than the problem we have in this area with like hazardous materials, or for instance, high-scale, large-scale technical rescue operations. The population of the area does not support having a lot of the resources available, whether they be locally funded or state funded. So like from the hazardous materials perspective, we had a meeting a few months ago about training with somebody from one of the facilities, and we said, oh, well, just understand. They're like, well, you would do this. And I'm like, no. First of all, no, we wouldn't, because we don't do that. And second of all, you've got somebody coming from Fort Detrick or Cumberland County, Shop 200, or maybe over at Letterkenny. Like, it's not going to be quick. And those were with chemicals and things. So I think what the chief, it doesn't surprise me, is saying that if you had that type of circumstance, by the time you got, I guess York County has And
They have a
what you
quick
would call a
response team.
cert, basically.
Yeah.
But it's just not going to be timely.
And to rely on the state police to respond, Wes is 100% right. I pray to God that incident is over
I mean, they're
before
going to
they have
come
time
the
to get
same
here.
as they would, like the state would, but they're basically bringing troopers that are equally equipped
Yeah.
to what he's discussing.
And even when I talk about the,
It's not, it's unfortunately, it's just not a good geographical situation.
I mean, when I talk about containment, that's what I mean, is that we would contain and wait for them to come if the situation dictated that.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Interested.
Yep. All right, so that, I guess, are there any other questions there with 410, 242, protection to persons or property? I know that's something we've looked at different times with, and we've tried some things to save money that haven't really panned out, and I understand. Taser maintenance, it seems you have that identified. I just want to make sure, kind of like Mr. Moon's sentiment, you have enough there in terms of what you need to do. It looks a little lower than it has been.
Yeah, we were buying 5 tasers and cartridges, and we're good with cartridges, or better with cartridges this year.
Than you had
And we're trying a new taser plan. Instead of issuing all the part-timers a taser, they'll check theirs out when they come in out of the lockbox, because it seems to be a better fit.
All right, and then we have a few items. The vehicles, that deals with basically comes from the fleet management program. There's not much to do there. Copier and computer parts, small equipment. Your minor includes your VASCAR calibration, your NRAD. Towing costs, I know, is always kind of, you kind of have to put a number in. Professional and other services, and then special legal services we always put there because there tends to be about that much. And I know that's kind of outside your control.
Mind if we take a break for 1 second? Leave it in the little boys' room.
We can. I'm actually looking to try to conclude this, hopefully, this part. If you want to go, we can.
No, well, I'll...
All right.
Suffer through
Because
it.
some of these just they're just landline telephone, page 49, there's really nothing to discuss there. Same with wireless on page 50.
If I could interrupt, I actually think we could probably trim a little off the 40,000.
On the...
Labor.
Okay. Again, that's kind of like, it's an assessment judgment call. The thing there is just realize, depending on the timing, we could be paying for some civil service revisions there, however you want to account for that.
Yeah, but the 2 outstanding grievances are going to be resolved this year, so we should have those costs.
That's true.
Next year,
Okay.
so take it down to 35.
Okay. Sounds good. So then you get your telephone and telephone, 49, pages 49 and 50, internet fees, 51, page 51, radio maintenance. Are you starting to see, have you been buying batteries and so forth? Are you having issues?
Yeah, they're not coming. We've ordered batteries.
I bet more in the aspect of...
Yes,
like
they're
you're at
starting
that point where they're starting to fail.
We're starting to see battery replacement, handheld microphone replacement. Those cords get frayed. And then antenna replacement, believe it or not, because they're knocked around and broken.
So do you think 2000's going to get you there, or you're not really I know it's probably hard to predict.
It's a finger cross, because as I think I was discussing with Charles, we just had to send a portable radio out for maintenance, and the minimum is $535 to fix, no matter what's wrong with it.
And that's what I'm thinking about, because like I know that there's a radio I use fairly often with a volume. The radio, in order to fix the volume knob, it has to be disassembled and reassembled by a technician. So that's what I'm thinking at. We're 9 years into that system.
I mean, we could double that and not spend any of it.
I understand.
We could leave it there and spend all of it plus. And I just
as long as everyone's aware, like that's where we're at on that radio system. It was fantastic that the commissioners did what they did, and we appreciate it. But we're getting into that phase. It's kind of like the HVAC. We're entering that time frame. We're gonna have problems. Computer and software is pretty direct. Is there anything there that is new?
There is. I would talk about the Trulio camera analytics at the $5,000. That is a program that analyzes body camera video. We talked about in our management meeting, and it's incredible. It's along the lines of what they're doing for customer service and things like that, and evaluating, and it creates values for different words.
And that's something, if you have that digitally, what you gave to us, if you could send that out to the council. This is a program that's designed to pick up on basically both positive and negative cues. And we talked about keywords and so forth. And not just to
dig that out and send
remediate, but also to essentially compliment officers on how they're interacting with people.
And the college may, I don't have a firm commitment from them, but the college has, the director of campus safety has said that he believes that's something, a project they would help fund.
So that would be nice, because I think it would have a direct connection there. So we get on to page 52 then. Mostly insurances, all which they are what they are, okay, based on what we get from Hockley and so forth. And they're spread out amongst all the various departments. And then we're almost out of that department. The page 53 deals with your memberships. Are there any new memberships there?
No.
Okay. 54 is all your Trista IT stuff. Page 55 is our last page in the police departments. This is where we would wrap, I think, this evening. Continuing education. I guess the biggest obstacle we always have, hopefully we're going to be, in all fairness, it might not be fixed in 23, but hopefully by 24 with the hirings, is being able to get people into class because of the scheduling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for 23, this number is probably, I know it's a little higher than 22, but I don't know. I'm just never really inclined to skimp on Con Ed.
Right.
So I almost wish it were higher, but I also realize that getting people into class yet in 23 is going to be hard until we get things really up to staffing. And there is a separate line there. I'm sorry, yeah.
I had a question on page 51 about the informant.
Yeah.
$5,400. When does that
sunset?
Yeah.
So it should be probably mid-year this year. What happened with the new RMS system is that they introduced a new RMS system, and when I was at their conference, I said, time out. We'll have a mutiny here. So we're going directly to their newest system without any additional cost. But that is not going to happen until the end of this year, first of next year. So we have to I've got to keep informant in there because I've got to keep using that. And then through the end of next year, we should be up and running completely and totally on the new system. So in 24, we can make informant go, because all the data that's in informant now, we paid to be converted into the new system. So in theory, we shouldn't need informant at all.
And will it be converted mid-year next year, do you think?
Yes, it should be converted.
So would we pay that entire amount, or would we pay?
Yes, that's a yearly maintenance. That's a yearly. No, I don't know that they would. I don't know. I can ask them, but I don't know.
Just looking to see if they do it quarterly.
Yeah.
Even if it was 2 or 3 quarters. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
You may find out that 3 quarters costs as much as a year.
Yeah, and
2. Like that kind of thing.
there may be potential that we could still use it and not pay the fee. It just wouldn't be updated. Now, then we wouldn't get any fixes that they may be putting out either. So that may be shooting ourselves in the foot. But I'll contact them.
If you can find out, that would be great.
Yes.
See if they prorate.
Yeah, we really only want to be running one.
Right.
When we get there. But I understand the transition. There's a special item there for community policing training. I think that one time was identified because we had some of that dealt with innovations for that purpose. I think that's why that's separated.
Yeah, that budget item is still from money that...
It's still there, but that was well-spent money.
Yeah, and I would like to, at some point, approach WellSpan to maybe redo that community
and we can always do
training
that.
And equipment grant.
We can always do that type of training through the Con Ed budget, too. Capital purchase machinery is all your vehicles, which are all through the fleet management program. And then minor machine, I know you brought this up previously, I believe, about converting the, and maybe it's already covered in capital expenditures, but the method your cars are using to connect to the internet currently is not great, and maybe that was in capital expenditures. This is
a setup fee for the new in-car cameras when they come in. They will automatically upload when they get into Wi-Fi range, so we have to get the Wi-Fi carried outside, and that's the Wi-Fi access, and a new laptop for which is shared with the records and desk officer. That laptop is ancient, and we use that to run CAD and those other things for them, and it's really not functional anymore. It's a second. We took it. It used to be the detective's laptop, and then it quit working for him. So we converted the laptop that we got back during COVID for records to take home and work from home to that detective's laptop, and we moved this laptop out to records. So it's outlived its useful life. And the setup fee for the in-car camera system is a static fee charged by GTAC, and that's a fee that we couldn't roll over into the lease program. So that's what that one is, and that's why that is.
And I'm kind of presuming that resides there rather than the capital budget, because the other ones are in-car computers, and this is not.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Questions anybody has for 410 police? Okay. If not, I think that's where we're going to stop this evening. Okay. And we have 2 weeks. We'll be coming back. We have a few questions there, but not as many as, it's not really that substantial. It's mostly all circulating around over time. And I think
So in 2 weeks, would you be able to give us an idea of what the overtime can be cut in 2 weeks? Is that something that you...
That's what we're going to be.
I'll include that in draft 3 and
Okay.
send it out.
That's where we're going to be for draft 3. So it'll need to be a little earlier than that.
We're making a decision on the other new officers. That'd be great.
Give us a proposal on that across so we can kind of know.
Yeah, I want to. I want to have a chance to sit down and talk to the 2 sergeants and see what we. I mean, I want to trim that as much as we can comfortably.
Because we're going to have to make that decision, and I do think that part of, we are in a situation where we have a fresh contract, so we know what's predictable in the next few years, and we have benefited from the ability to use part-time, so we need to make sure we're accounting for all that. All right?
Great, thank you.
All right. Anything else before we go to public comment? Not any public comment? All right. If none, we will adjourn to executive session.
I thank the staff for being here tonight.